Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And I do hope that February 2022 is treating you all well so far. Now, as it's the first Friday of the month, we are once again taking a look through the history news headlines from last month that caught my eye. As always, I'll be using the description box to link those history news articles that we're going to be looking at today, in addition to any other relevant materials. There are going to be some updates and some new news. If you'd like to refresh your memory on any of the previous history news roundup videos that I've made, then you can check out the linked playlist. I will also be starting a new playlist with this episode that's going to cover the headlines from 2022. Before we get into the news, though, I do have a massive thank you that I would like to share with you all. A few months ago, I was lucky enough to be sent an OrCam Read. If you saw my video on literacy and history, which I will be leaving linked, you might also remember that my OrCam Read has been given a name. So say hello once again to Harvey. As a dyslexic, I find it a real challenge to be able to read and retain information. The OrCam Read has made such a difference because something that I found is that being able to have a text read aloud to me while I'm following along on the page is so helpful to both my ability and my speed when it comes to being able to process the written information that's sitting before me. It probably won't be surprising to you all that the OrCam Read has proven to be particularly useful for these monthly videos where I collect together history news stories to share with you all. Frequently, I will end up discussing a news item about an historical find that sits outside of my area of expertise, meaning that I have to be extra sure that I have fully processed and understood the information in the article or articles that I'm talking about. Using the OrCam Read has made comprehending unfamiliar terms and complex descriptions that are in some of these texts just so much easier for me. For this video, I really put this device to the test because I was reading articles on my phone as they were being suggested to me by my Google homepage and also by some of you on Twitter. I read some others on my iPad in my living room while I was hanging out with my husband as he was watching whatever post-apocalyptic sci-fi show he's currently working his way through. So, in this instance, the headphone jack on the OrCam Read was absolutely vital for ensuring marital harmony. Then, when I was sitting down to write the final script for this episode, I airdropped the articles onto my laptop and then I used the OrCam Read to look at them on there too. For more information on the OrCam Read, please click on the link in my description box. Individuals in the UK with reading challenges may be eligible to get the OrCam Read through the Access to Work programme or Disabled Students Allowance for university students. Thank you once again to the lovely people at OrCam for sending me this incredibly useful device. But now, let's see what Harvey has been reading to me this week. We've got an awful lot to cover, so let's jump right in. Updates first. I've seen a couple of comments inquiring about whether there have been any updates following the excavations that took place in search of answers to the question about what happened to the people of the so-called lost colony of Roanoke in Virginia. I have been keeping my ear to the ground on this, but to my knowledge, the latest news on the most recent digs was published in September 2021. And from what I could learn from reading up on them, there is still more that would need to be found before the various mysteries connected to the colonists and their potential fate might be considered to be solved. Eric Klingelhofer, director of the First Colony Foundation, explained, quote, "As to the precise location of the lost colony settlement, still an unsolved mystery, with some luck, the patient work involved in the glacial speed of archaeology may still pay off. We look forward to using our past and continued survey work in the park to locate the settlement and Ralph Lane's fort. which was adjacent to the settlement, he said. He continued, "While it's very likely that erosion has removed portions of the site, we expect that enough remains to excavate." The website for the foundation seems to be curating and hosting the most up-to-date news on the site explorations and any discoveries. I'm going to be continuing to check that website each month, but I'll also leave it linked so that you can follow along with me as well. Next up, we have a Benin bronze repatriation update, which The Guardian is framing in the following way. Mark Brown, North of England correspondent for the media outlet, begins his article with the following paragraph, quote, "A Benin bronze in the collection of a Newcastle museum is to be proactively returned to Nigeria. The latest in a number of repatriations that ratchet up pressure on the British Museum to follow suit." This connection between one museum's decision to repatriate and pressure being applied to the British Museum is something that I have seen being put forward on an ever-increasing basis. As I've mentioned in previous videos, there is apparently a question over whether the British Museum could legally do anything similar to those other institutions. Rather, from what I have seen asserted, the museum's hands are tied. Unless they can successfully challenge the law that prevents them from disposing of collection items, or unless the government steps in to amend the act that the museum is bound by. With that being said, the spokesperson for the museum was not inclined to raise this as a counterpoint to any pressure that they are experiencing, and instead they offered the following statement, quote, "We believe the strength and public value of the British Museum collection resides in its breadth and depth, allowing millions of visitors every year an understanding of the cultures of the world and how they interconnect over time, whether through trade, migration, conquest, or peaceful exchange. The museum understands and recognises the significance of the issues surrounding the return of objects and works with communities, colleagues and museums across the globe to share the collection as widely as possible." In comparison, V. Pollock, Dean of Culture and the Creative Arts at Newcastle University, which has stewardship of the collections, including the bronze stave that is the subject of this article and the repatriation, asserted that, quote, "There is no real question for us that the right thing to do was to offer its return. We were able to trace the provenance, which categorically let us know that it was part of the punitive expedition." So far, this reported pressure seems to be having little effect on British Museum policy, but perhaps that is not the case behind the scenes. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, as the bronzes that have been repatriated so far begin their journey back to Nigeria, it has been necessary for that nation's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, the NCMM, to respond in some way to the objections that have been raised by the current Oba, or King of Benin, about the artefacts being housed in the planned Edo Museum of West African Art, rather than in an institution that was controlled by the Royal Court of Benin, which would be the Oba's preference. The BBC have reported that his public opposition, the Oba's, quote, "could jeopardise plans for the return of some of Africa's most famous artefacts." However, the director of the NCMM, Abba Issa Tijani, who has been busily travelling the globe collecting up the repatriated Benin bronzes, the ones that have already been relinquished, took time to attempt to defuse the situation. And in regard to the Oba's plan for a Benin Royal Museum, Tijani has been quoted as saying, "We will support the construction of any new museum. It is needed. The facilities we have now will not be enough for the artefacts that are coming back. The Commission supports the palace museums. We have a few of them across the country." So perhaps then the reports of the repatriation process being jeopardised have been a little overstated, because it seems to me at least that Tijani is doing a masterful job of creating compromise. Our final update relates to a news item that I talked about in the History News from May 2021 episode regarding the origins of the Cern Abbas giant. If you've been watching the channel for a while, perhaps you saw that video, in which case you may well have noticed my barely successful attempts to remain professional whilst discussing a 55-metre tall chalk hill figure with a prominent and obviously tumescent phallus. Now, I'm sure that some classy people can look upon this image with not even the merest twitch of a smile on their face. Friends, I am not that person. But the giant is back in the news because it was explored as part of the BBC's Digging for Britain documentary series. The archaeological team dug down almost a metre in order to locate the deposits that are connected with the period that the giant was constructed or cut. Finds of snail shells were able to offer a rough idea of how early the giant could have been made, because certain species of snail only appear after particular dates in history. To narrow the date range down further, the team invited Philip Toms, Head of Environmental Sciences at the University of Gloucestershire, to come and use luminescence dating in order to pinpoint when the sediment was last exposed to sunlight. From this, a date range of 700 CE to 1100 CE was revealed. This dismisses previous suggestions that the giant was either prehistoric or 17th century in origin, and in that case created in connection to the English Civil War. Instead, it seems that it is firmly medieval, and that it may be tied to the founding of Cerne Abbey in 987 CE. Those were the updates. Now it's time for the new news. Firstly, I've decided not to share any photos that accompany this first news headline because the story is about human remains, and so are all of the images that I could find. I may reassess how I feel about doing this, but for now, the article is linked so you can make the choice about whether or not you want to see the pictures. The headline for the article, I think, also speaks for itself. Haunting mystery of 163 superbly preserved 200-year-old child mummies may be solved. They were laid to rest in the so-called child chapel of the Capuchin catacombs of Palermo in northern Sicily, and it's thought that these children died between 1787 and 1880. Over the next 2 years, scientists plan to X-ray 41 sets of these remains in order to hopefully discover their causes of death. Dr. Kirsty Squires from Staffordshire University explains that, quote, "Given that this funerary rite was mainly reserved for adults, we want to understand why the children were mummified. We have a fairly good idea that they were from the upper ranks of society, but we don't know much more about juvenile health, development, or identity during this period. This project will provide essential data to determine which children were afforded mummification and to put this into a broader context. As this project is slated to run for 2 more years, we may have a while to wait for the updates on this team's findings, but I will be sure to let you know when they are released." A team made up of archaeologists from Suffolk County Council Archaeological Service and Cotswold Archaeology Limited, alongside volunteers, have been working on a site in Rendlesham, Suffolk, and there they have located a 7th century settlement. The excavations have uncovered evidence of craft working taking place on this site. The byproducts of ore smelting have been found, which signal to the team that Rendlesham's craftspeople worked in ironsmithing and also with copper alloy. This evidence, when coupled with the fact that Rendlesham is just 3 miles away from the early medieval cemeteries at Sutton Hoo, has led researchers to posit that some of the extraordinary items that were uncovered at Sutton Hoo in 1939 may have been made in the workshops that they have just uncovered at Rendlesham. A few days from now, on the 10th of February, Winchester will host the unveiling of a life-size bronze statue of Lycoricia of Winchester. She was a Jewish businesswoman who lived and worked in Winchester in the 13th century. She has been referred to as, quote, the most important Jewish woman in medieval England, and she was a major financier for King Henry III and his queen, Eleanor of Provence. The Jewish community in medieval England was the focus of fury and persecution from the church, and they were also frequently taxed arbitrarily and unfairly by the state. Sadly, Licorice's connection to the royal family could not keep her physically safe either, because she would be murdered in 1277. Henry and Eleanor's son, Edward I, would then preside over the expulsion of the entire Jewish community from England in 1290. Jewish people would not be welcome again until the 17th century, when Oliver Cromwell permitted their return. The team behind this project explained that, quote, "The project to install a statue of Licoricia aims to inform people about England's little-known but important medieval Jewish community. But there's more statue news, and this one will be the cause of joy for Mary Anning fans, which, as far as I'm concerned, we all should be. This story deals with the fact that this 19th century fossil hunter and paleontologist is finally being recognised with a statue. The piece has been sculpted by Denise Dutton and is set to be unveiled in Lyme Regis, which is Anning's hometown, in May of 2022. The bronze of Anning and her dog Tray will stand upon a spot overlooking Black Ven Cliffs on the Jurassic Coast in Dorset, which is the spot where Anning made most of her finds. It is also the background that's seen in the only portrait ever painted of Anning. Credit for this needs to go to Evie Swire, now 13 years old, who began the Mary Anning Rocks campaign. Evie's campaign secured some very esteemed patrons, including Sir David Attenborough and Professor Alice Roberts. It took 4 years to raise the £100,000 and to deal with the masses of bureaucracy over where to place this statue for this auspicious point to be reached. Evie's mother, Anya Pearson, is understandably very proud of what her daughter has achieved, and like her, I hope that this statue and the learning legacy that will accompany it might prove useful for discovering the next generation of Mary Annings. On a related note, if you are going to be in or around London on the 5th of March, the Natural History Museum will be hosting an event for their members with children, ideally aged 4 to 8, where they will get the chance to meet Mary Anning and to learn from her. Now, those of you who have watched the video where I got to interview Victoria and Albert, or if you've seen the Monarchs Anonymous channel, you are going to recognise our Mary Anning, because she is my lovely friend who also happens to be one of the directors of Cerridwen Theatre Company, and they are the people who have recently made me an associate artist. On top of that, she is also absolutely fabulous at what she does. The first of these events was booked for the 5th of February and it's already sold out, and I imagine that the March date will be going in much the same way. You do have to be a member to book for this event, and it is £5 for children, but the adult accompanying those children does get to go for free. As always, you'll be able to find the link for this event in the description box of this video. The next History News headline is something that I have no doubt would have thrilled Mary Anning, even though she might have been a little bit jealous that she wasn't the one to find it. A 30-foot or 10-metre long, near-complete fossilised ichthyosaur skeleton has been found near Leicester, in the Rutland Water Nature Reserve. This specimen has been dated to 180 million years ago. Dean Lomax from the University of Manchester has stated that, quote, "It is a truly unprecedented discovery and one of the greatest finds in British paleontological history. And yes, this is certainly the biggest ichthyosaur fossil to ever be found in Britain. But nevertheless, let's not forget that Mary Anning will always be able to lay claim to discovering the very first one, all the way back in 1811. Something I've noticed among historians is that each group, depending on their particular area of expertise, will have something that is commonly and mistakenly believed about their area of study that, when repeated, just drives them up the wall. And for those who study the Vikings, that thing seems to be horned helmets. The pervasive belief that Vikings could be identified by their horned helmets that they wore when they went a-raiding is something that I think for all of them makes their teeth itch. So last month, when news broke that the Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, there was a chorus of experts exclaiming that this wasn't news to them. And of course, they are correct. But I do hope that now this news is getting more attention, that they will at least come to find their lives a little less frustrating. The confusion laid down its roots seemingly in 1942, when these two horned helmets were found in eastern Denmark by someone who was cutting peat for fuel. Recently, birch tar that was found on one of the horns was submitted for radiocarbon dating, and it's now been confirmed that these helmets were deposited in the peat bog in around 900 BCE. And as Tom Metcalfe points out for Live Science, this date was, quote, many centuries before the Vikings or Norse dominated the region. An artist's reconstruction of one of the helmets has also been produced. Metcalfe again. As well as their prominent horns, the helmets are adorned with symbols meant to look like the eyes and beak of a bird of prey. Plumage that has since eroded was likely stuck into the ends of the horns with birch tar, and each helmet may also have had a mane of horsehair. These would be supremely impractical in a fight, because the very last thing you want is something that makes your head a bigger target, something that could get tangled up with an assailant or their weapons, or that was easy to grasp and be used to lead you around by. Logically, then, they are being worn to make some statement. Presumably, they indicate the prominence of the wearer within their particular community. All this, however, does make me wonder if we are going to see any change in the costume shop version of the Viking anytime soon. The next history headline reads as follows. Scientists looking at the first pregnant Egyptian mummy think they figured out why none were ever found before. Indeed, their findings suggest that pregnancies in other mummies may simply have been missed. It was apparently considered to be weird that no one had ever spotted a fetus in a mummified body before. And when you think about how risky pregnancy and childbirth could be, I think weird is certainly the word that I would use too. But rather than there being some cultural aversion to mummifying pregnant bodies, it instead seems that previous investigations, which made use of X-ray technology, were simply not up to the task. Wojciech Eisman from the Warsaw Mummy Project that is analysing these remains explains that, quote, radiologists were looking for bones, and our case shows that actually you shouldn't. You should look for the soft tissue with a unique shape. The mummified mother became an acidic environment for the fetus, with the result being that its bones almost all dissolved. Eisman, in fact, likened it to being, quote, pickled. I can only imagine that this discovery will prompt researchers to go back and look at other mummies in order to see if pregnancies might have been missed in them too. Did anyone say Jumanji? A 4,000-year-old board game has been found by archaeologists in Oman, and we are told that as yet the rules remain a mystery. Apparently, the game is based on a similar principle to the royal game of Ur, which I have been reliably informed has been played and its rules explained over here on YouTube, and that game is itself similar to backgammon. Now, this new discovery, we're told, is similar, but it's not the same. In this case, the discovery is a large stone board with grid-like markings that seem to indicate different fields of play. It also, apparently, has cup holes. Presumably, if and or when the rules of this game become clear, we will be updated. I'm sure somebody will be on YouTube to play it in due course. Unless, of course, they are just too preoccupied dealing with random elephant or rhino stampedes popping up, of course. This next headline really surprised me. Medieval war horses no bigger than modern day ponies study finds. Now, I was definitely under the impression that the traditional war horse was a veritable behemoth. But instead, as Stephen Morris explains in the Guardian article on this discovery and its process, quote, the researchers examined the bones of about 2,000 horses, dating from the 4th to the 17th centuries, found at castles, a medieval horse cemetery, and other archaeological sites in England, as well as combing historical records and fictional stories of chivalry. The vast majority of medieval horses, including ones believed to have been used in war, were less than 14.2 hands, that's 4 foot 10 inches high, the maximum height of a modern pony. One of the biggest they found was a horse from the Norman period, the remains of which were discovered in the grounds of Trowbridge Castle in Wiltshire, but it was only 15 hands, the size of a small, modern, light riding horse. However, more exploration is still needed because there are few, if any, finds of horse remains on actual battlefields. And this may be explained by the fact that fallen horses were, we are told, usually taken to the knacker's yard for disposal, rather than being buried in this kind of organised manner. So, the question remains, were these pony-sized horses that have been found buried all war horses, or did they instead fulfil some other role within their community? There is, fortunately, a site in Westminster that it is hoped might provide further evidence, as will explorations of extant horse armour and an examination of the DNA from their bones. I will, of course, be updating you when this research work has been done and when the study's findings have been published. Many thanks to Patricia Pruitt on Twitter for sending this article my way. A leading art historian, Christopher Wright, who bought what he believed was a copy of Sir Anthony van Dyck's portrait of Isabella Clara Eugenia, Infanta of Spain and Regentess of the Spanish Netherlands, for £65 in 1970, has now discovered that it is likely to be by Van Dyck himself rather than a copy. Wright took the piece to the Courtauld Institute of Art in central London, where it has been examined and restored. The portrait is believed to date from between 1628 and 1632. The last of these years, 1632, being the year when Van Dyck returned to England, at which point King Charles I appointed him his principal painter and knighted him. Kendall Francis and Timothy McCall, the authors of the Courtauld's report on this painting, point out that Van Dyck and his workshop produced many such Infanta portraits, and that it can be, in quotes, very challenging to determine the extent to which assistants were involved. They conclude, quote, the adroit skill leads us to tentatively propose that it can be attributed to Van Dyck's workshop, and that it was completed during his lifetime and under his supervision. Wright is, however, sure, and he points to the beauty of the hands in this piece, which he asserts is a feat of skill that could only have been achieved by Van Dyck himself. Thanks also go to Twins Things on Twitter for sharing this story about the discovery of 3 painted burial vaults which date from the 14th century. The find was originally made in May of last year during works in a street near the Church of Our Lady in Bruges in West Flanders. To protect and preserve these finds, it was necessary to source expert advice and also the special equipment to make the excavation as safe as possible. And so the process of rescuing these items has been a long one, but ultimately, thankfully, a successful one. Colin Clapson reports that, quote, the best preserved burial vault is now receiving a temporary home in the Church of Our Lady before it is moved to the Church Museum. The paintings show classical medieval representations. They appear on a layer of plaster and feature angels, crosses and other Christian themes. The vault can be viewed in 3D on the Rakvlak website. Both the article and that website will, of course, be linked in my description box. The topic of letter locking also made the headlines last month, and I saw and was sent a number of articles about it. Put simply, letter locking was a way to secure letters, or at the very least, to warn if a letter had been tampered with. It uses folds, cuts, stitches, and seals. The locks would vary in complexity from person to person. Some individuals seem to have devised their own signature locks. Perhaps they even took pride in their appearance and or the various complexities of their versions. I mentioned in last week's video that I went to see the Elizabeth and Mary exhibition at the British Library, and well, there is an exhibit of a locked letter and a video of a letter being locked as part of that wider exhibition, which, as a reminder, only runs until the 20th of February 2022. So if you are planning on going, you don't have massive time left to do so. Additionally, when it comes to letter locking, a few years ago I was incredibly fortunate in that I got to attend a letter locking workshop, and while I was there I got to have a go at locking my own letters, and it was just so informative and such good fun. Luckily for us, the research team behind the letter locking project have created a brilliant website and YouTube channel if you would like to see more, or even try your hand at locking one of your own letters. As always, both website and YouTube channel will be linked below. Next up, we have the lovely story of a metal detectorist who had hung up his device while his children were young, who was then convinced by them to start searching again. And Michael Lee Mallory is no doubt going to be very grateful for his children's encouragement in this regard, because not long after taking up his former hobby once again, he found this. A gold Henry III penny that was buried just 10 centimetres deep on a piece of Devon farmland. And according to Stephen Morris, writing for The Guardian, this penny, quote, was struck in about 1257 by the King's goldsmith William of Gloucester, with precious metal imported from North Africa. The coin features a portrait of the bearded and crowned Henry III on his throne, and about 52,000 of them were minted. It became apparent that they were financially unviable because the value of the coin was less than its weight in gold, and almost all were melted down. Lee Mallory's is only the 8th known example. The penny was auctioned by Spink and Son, where it is reported to have achieved a hammer price of £540,000. However, the extra fees that are on this item took that final figure to the person buying it to the grand total of £648,000. Michael Lee Mallory will be splitting the windfall with the owner of the land upon which he made his find, but he has also said that his cut is being set aside to fund the future education of his children. Apparently, his daughter is a budding archaeologist. On the successful bidder, Gregory Edmond, who is a senior numismatist at Spink & Sons auction house, said, quote, "It was bought by an anonymous private collector in the United Kingdom, who intends to place the coin on loan to a public institution or museum. When the institution that this coin will be loaned to is named, I will be sure to update you all." The next history news item that I want to draw your attention to is also about an incredible find being taken out of the soil. This blue glass bowl, which in this photograph is being held by just the one single hand, is, friends, at least 2,000 years old and is a Roman piece. It was excavated in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. I'm sure that I cannot be the only one that is utterly astounded that this glass bowl has managed to survive completely intact. I mean, there is not a chip or a crack on the whole piece. I haven't been able to find out where this bowl will be heading. I assume and certainly hope that it will be going to a museum or gallery where it will be put on public display, and hopefully the relevant information in this regard will be forthcoming very soon, because my goodness, I'd love to make the trip to see this in person. Last but by no means least, I want to finish with news of the unveiling on the 14th of January of this Nubian Jack Community Trust blue plaque at what is now the Trinity Laban Conservatoire at Greenwich Naval College. And that stands on the site of the Palace of Placentia, which was one of Henry VIII's favourite palaces. As we can see, this plaque commemorates John Blanke, a trumpeter of African origin employed in the court of Henry VII and Henry VIII at the Tudor Palace on this site. John Blanke is thought to be the first Black Briton to have an image of himself recorded. In his case, he can be found on the Westminster Tournament Roll. This document is connected to the 1511 celebrations that surrounded the short-lived son of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Michael Ohajuru has written about the experience of participating in the unveiling on the John Blanke Project blog. He points out that, quote, "The site at Greenwich is a very fitting place to remember John Blanke, as Henry VIII had a great tilt yard, a courtyard for jousting, made in the grounds of the palace so that he and his men could practice jousting and hold tournaments. John Blanke would have almost certainly played at those tournaments, just as he did at the February 1511 tournament held at Westminster, where he is shown playing at its opening and closing." In addition to his image appearing in the Westminster Tournament Roll, John Blanke is also recorded as being present to play at Henry VII's funeral and Henry VIII's coronation. He is also recorded as having successfully petitioned Henry VIII to increase his wages. If you want to know more, do check out the link to the John Blanke Project website, which I will leave linked, because it's full of great blog posts and videos. But what do you think of any or all of the headlines that we have looked at today? Were there any history news headlines that caught your eye in January that I didn't discuss in this video? And if so, what were they? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me on social media. I will leave links to the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so follow me over on some or all of them so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, why not share it with your friends? And please also let me know you enjoyed it by hitting the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, and do check to see you are subscribed if you want to be, because there have been people telling me that when they go and check, YouTube has unsubscribed them. So while you've got a minute, have a little look. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button, and then in the drop down select all, so that YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.